This video is brought to you by the Angular Tutorial. The Angular Tutorial is a book written by me that teaches you everything you need to know to get proficient with Angular to the point to where you feel comfortable enough to go out on the market and get a job. You're at a point right now to where you're like, you know what? I'm messing around with programming. I think this is something I want to do, but I just don't have a comprehensive resource that is going to teach me how to build web applications. That's going to teach me how to, set up a database, get a database running, interact with an API, make HTTP requests, build an application with Angular, and then eventually deploy it out into the web so that all of your friends, your family, they can all use it. All while using automated testing, using all the skills you need to walk into an interview and say, I am right for this job. I've taught myself how to program. I have the skills. I need to get it done. This book is for you. This is the book I wrote that I wish I had when I was first starting out in programming, because it felt like I was just taking bits and pieces from a bunch of tutorials, and I'd always wanted something where everything was in one place, where I could just buy one book and feel confident that if I take the time to work through it, learn the material, that I will come out feeling capable to begin a career as a front-end developer at a tech company. So if you want to learn front-end development, check out the Angular Tutorial at angulartutorial.org for a digital copy, and it's also available in paperback on Amazon. Check the links below if you're interested. Hello and welcome back to episode number 4 of Code Companion. So in the previous episode, we took a closer look at data types in JavaScript, and we also learned about variables, which are containers that we can use to store the values and the data types that we're using in JavaScript. And then finally, we also introduced the if-else statement available to us in JavaScript and learned how we can use if and else to control the flow of our program. So we used some of the data types that we created, some of the variables we created, and then used if-else to kind of direct the user towards two different paths depending on, what our condition was. In this video, we're going to look at some of the properties and methods that are available to us in JavaScript, and then at the end, we're going to finish up by looking at taking our first look at iteration within programming. This is something that's very common within programming. You're going to encounter it in every language. So it's knowledge that you're going to use no matter what language you're using, and it's really something that's, I would say, gives you the first taste or gives you the first feeling of actually doing some real programming, because you're sort of beginning to automate some things that up until this point we haven't really automated. So let's take a look. So the first thing we'll do is create a new directory for our code. So we'll use mkdir, which stands for make directory. And then we'll add a name like webdev, properties, and methods. So we make that directory, and then we use cd, which stands for change directory, to move into that directory. So you can just type web and then tab, and it'll autocomplete that name for you. So we do that. Now we're in that directory, so we can just create the file that we're going to write our code in. So we start with the touch command, touch, and then we add the name of our file. So we'll do properties and methods.js. And then in Visual Studio, you can just open up the directory that you just made and the now blank file that you just created. All right, so the first thing we'll do is kind of recap where we left off last time. So I'm just going to go to the blog post, which covers everything in this video. So if things are moving too fast, you need to pause something, or you want to just copy and paste the code instead of writing it yourself, you can just come to the blog post like I'm doing right here. So I'm just going to copy this, come over here and paste that, and I'll make this a little bit bigger for you guys. And also, if you want to hide this thing right here, this little explorer, you can just do Command B on Mac, and that'll hide it. All right, so last video, we left off creating a few objects like this, and we learned how we can access the properties of this object using this dot notation, right? So we have my user, and then right there we just do dot name, and that logs out my name. So if we go back here, we do node, properties and methods, we see, sure enough, my name is logged out. Well, the interesting thing about JavaScript is that pretty much everything in the language is an object. And we can see what I mean by this by Going back down here, and we're just going to copy this code, paste that, and here you'll see that we have a username variable set to a string, which is just my name in lowercase, and then we log username.length. So that might look a little weird because, like earlier, if I just undo this, my user.name made sense. We have a name property here with a value, Adam Morgan, but it's a part of this object that we created with those braces. But here, we just have a string. But even though we didn't declare it like an object, in JavaScript, it still is. So it has certain properties about it that we still access through dot notation like this that gives us the length of the string. It's not just strings that have properties either. We can also see that arrays have properties too. So if we do something like this, and then we create an array of languages like JavaScript, Ruby, and then we'll do Python, then we could go down here, console.log, languages, dot, and you'll even see that it tries to autocomplete. It even lets you know there's a property length. So we can tab that, save it, and then go back here, run it one more time, and sure enough, we see that it can tell you a property about an array such as its length. Now at this point you might be asking, what's a practical application of a property like length? And this is actually one of my goals with this video series, is that when I explain something like this, when I explain a concept, I want to also provide examples that, you know, even if you're not there yet, we're still in the beginning stages, it at least helps you understand how this might be used when you're building web applications that you've used yourself. This is a problem that I have with a lot of tutorials, is that they can get to be a bit academic. So they show you the concept with no real practical application, which is what I want to give you here. So let's think about, you know, signing up for a website, right? You go to Reddit, you go to, you know, some website, you go to create a username, and then you hit some issue. You know, you're in the forum, you type in your username, and they tell you that you have some sort of requirements. Well, this is when something like length comes in. So we'll do something like let username equals Adam, and then down here we'll use an if statement. This is something we learned in our last video. So we'll do if username.length is, we'll do less than 5, and then we'll say console.log your username is too short. And then the other condition, if their username is 5 characters or longer, we'll say console.log your username meets the requirements. Something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was in the blog post, but we can save that. Come back here, I'll just clear this, and then we'll do NODE, properties and methods. Once again, right there, because I just typed NOD, you can type up, and it'll autocomplete the last command that you ran that started with those letters. So we'll do node properties and methods, hit enter, and it says your username is too short. And that makes sense because my username is just 4 characters. So if we do this, save that, run it one more time, your username meets the requirements. So this is one way that you can use a property like length in a practical way that you and I have probably both encountered using the internet at some point. This example actually kind of brings us to our next point, because imagine if you have, like we have a condition right here. The username is, if the length of the username is less than 5, then we want to do this. But what if there's another condition and we want both conditions to be true before we run this? Well, this is where we introduce the idea of the logical operators. So this is an example of a comparison operator. So it compares this value to this value. What a logical operator does is it compares 2 expressions. And the logical AND operator being these double ampersands right here. And what it does is it compares this expression and this expression. And if both of them are truthy, then the whole thing evaluates to true. So we'll save this, we'll go back here, and we'll run our code. And sure enough, we see it evaluates to true. So let's finish this with all of the other combinations. So we'll do true and false. We'll do false and true. Then we'll do false and false. Now remember, both sides have to be truthy in order for the entire thing to evaluate as true. So we already saw this one evaluates the true because both sides are true. Here we have true and false. That should be false. Here we have false and true. That should also be false. And then finally we have false and false. That should also be false. So we can go back here, run our code one more time, and sure enough we see true, false, false, and false. So now with this logical AND operator, we can go back to our previous example, and instead of just validating the length of a username, we can actually do a username and a password. So let's see what that looks like. So we'll go back to Visual Studio Code. Once again, we'll declare a username. We'll declare a password, which I'll just set to something short like this. And then we're going to do if username.length is greater than 5 and password. I should probably use the autocomplete a little bit more. .length is greater than 5. We'll write something like your username and password meet the length requirements. Otherwise, or else, console.log your username or password is too short. So, previously, we had one condition in our if. We just had something like this, username.length, and then we had some comparison, right? Here we have username.length is greater than 5. Now we can see this looks greater than 5. And now we have another condition that also has to be truthy for this to run. Password.length is greater than 5. We see that the length of password is just 3 characters. So when we run this, we should see this logged out to the screen. Your username or password is too short. So we'll go back here, run our code, and sure enough, we see the else statement logged out to us saying that it's too short. So just to verify that this is working correctly, we'll go up here, we'll just change this to something longer than 5, go back to our terminal, run the code one more time, and sure enough, now we've met the length requirements. So we have our 2 conditions here, our 2 expressions. Username.length is greater than 5, which is true, and password.length is greater than 5, which is true, which is why we saw this logged out to the screen. Now remember that the REPL exists. It's your friend. It's there for you to use. So if something like this, username.length is greater than 5 is throwing you off, and you're like, okay, what does that evaluate to if I just ran that? Well, you can do that. You can just go to Chrome, you can do Command Option J, or you can go to View, Developer Tools, and then you can just declare a variable. So we'll do username equals Adam J. Morgan, and then we'll do username.length is greater than 5. You'll see that's true. And you can also just do it on a string itself. So if you just do like hello.length is less than 3, that evaluates to false. So if you're ever confused and you want to know what the result of any of these conditions are, you can just put them directly into the REPL and see what's returned. Before moving on, we need to cover one more logical operator. So we looked at the logical AND operator. Well, there's also this thing known as the logical OR operator. And we'll start just with a basic one. So we'll do true or true. So we saw earlier the logical AND was 2 ampersands like this. Logical OR is just 2 pipes or vertical bars like that. And with AND, we saw that both sides had to be truthy for the thing to evaluate as true. With OR, only one side has to be true. Only one of these expressions has to be truthy for the whole thing to evaluate as true. So once again, we'll just save this. We'll go back here, clear that, and then we'll run it. We see that it's true because true or true, it's true. And once again, we'll finish this with the rest of the combinations. We'll do true or false, console.log false or true, console.log false or false. All right, so we already saw that this one evaluates true because both sides are true. Here we have true or false. One of them's true, so this one should be true. Here we have false or true. One of them's true, so it should still be true. And then finally, false or false. Both sides are false, so now this one should evaluate to false. So we'll go back here, run it one more time, and we see true, 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 and false. Just as I did with the logical AND operator, I also want to provide a real-world-ish example of where the logical OR operator might come in handy. So imagine, you have a website, and within the website, like something like Reddit, you have like a different view, a different page where administrators or moderators can kind of go through and like delete comments, hide certain things. We might have different user statuses, right? You have like an administrator, you also have moderators, and certain parts of your website might be restricted to, anybody but those people, right? Only moderators and admins can get in. So we'll start with just a user object. So we'll create just an empty object like that, and then we'll add two properties. So we'll do is admin is false, and then we'll do is moderator set to true, because we're showing off OR, so we just want one of these to be true. And then below that, we're going to do if user.isAdmin or user.isModerator, and we'll write something like console.log. I only care about one. They are authorized. And then otherwise, or else, meaning that both of these are false, we'll say .log, don't let them in. So we'll save that. So now we're going to hit this. User.admin is false. Or user.isModerator. That one's true, so we should see this logged out, because with OR, only one side has to be true. So we save that. We'll go back here. We'll run this. And we see I only care about one. They are authorized. So once again, we'll make sure that this works as we intend it to. We'll change this to false. So now user.admin is false, user.isModerator is false. So we have false or false, which is false, which means our else statement should run. We should see don't let them in. And there we go, don't let them in. That's the logical OR operator. The last thing we're going to look at are the methods available to us on the data types that we've been using. So let's start with, we'll just have a simple string. So we'll do username equals Adam like that. And then down here, we're going to do username, and then we'll do lowercase. You can already see the autocomplete. But unlike properties, which just reference a property name like this, because these are methods, these are internally functions, which means we have to call them. So we have to do the open and close parentheses to actually call the function, similar to the way we're doing console.log with an open and close parentheses. So here you do username dot two lowercase, open and close parentheses. It doesn't need a argument. So we'll do that. And then we'll do one more console.log username dot two uppercase. We'll save that. And then we can go down here. We'll run that. We see that sure enough, it takes the string that I declared, or the variable that I declared, username, and here it takes all the characters, puts them to lowercase, and in the second console.log, it took all the characters and made them uppercase. So how did I know about those methods? How did I know that those were available for me, that there was just this method to lowercase that just existed on string? Well, this is where documentation comes into play, and learning how to read documentation is an extremely important skill that you're going to have to develop as a programmer, and I think it's one that's worth introducing pretty early on. So if you go back to my blog post, you'll see that I have a link to the documentation for array methods. So within this page, you can see methods along with a list of methods right here. And below each of them, they tell you what the method does. So here, like we'll just look at this pop one because we're about to use it. it says that it removes the last element from an array and it returns that element. And you can click array.pop, and while you're here, I mean, they actually have code written for you, set up, kind of like what we've done so far, and you can even run it and see what all these console.log statements evaluate to. So with any language, when you start working with strings, you start working with numbers, you start working with arrays, one thing you'll commonly do is like go to the documentation and just look it up to see what kind of methods are available to you, because before you write some code yourself to do something, there might be a method that's already written and available to you that you can use. Okay, so let's take a look at one of these array methods, which we said we were going to look at, which is pop. So I'm just going to copy and paste this code from the blog post, save a little bit of typing, and let's take a look at what we have here. So we start with a favorite fruits array, and we populate it with a bunch of strings, so mango, blueberry, and raspberry. Then down here, we declare another variable called returned value. We'll get back to that in just a minute, but the important part is that we call this thing favoritefruits.pop. So we call that method. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to take this out for just a second. So we'll just call favoritefruits.pop. So we'll actually remove this as well because returned value no longer exists. We just deleted it. So we have favorite fruits with 3 strings. We call pop. And as the array, or as the method documentation says, it removes the last element from the array. So we're going to save this. We'll go back to our terminal, clear this, run it, and we see mango and blueberry. So we started off with mango, blueberry, and raspberry. We called pop, and then now we just get mango and blueberry. So let's go back to the actual code that we copied in, this returned value variable declaration. What's going on here? Well, we're going to go up here, open up that documentation one more time. Actually, we can just read it right here. Array.pop, it says it removes the last element from an array and it returns that element. Keywords returns that element. So what that means is when you call the array method, when you call favoritefruits.pop right here, it's actually going to give us back a value. And as it says here, it's going to give us the element that it took off of the array. So rather than just calling favoritefruits.pop like we did earlier, we're going to declare a variable, and then rather than assign it a value, we're going to assign it to the return value of the function call favoritefruits.pop. And then just like we did last time, we're going to log out favorite fruits, and below that, we're going to log returned value. So we'll save that. You obviously see the answer here, but we'll go here, run that one more time, and we see mango, blueberry still the same, but now we have raspberry below that. Because up until now, everything we've been doing, all the functions that we've been calling just does something, right? We called alert, and that would open up a little pop-up in the browser window. When we're writing programs like this, we use console.log that just writes a value to the screen. But sometimes functions not only do something, but they also give you something back. And when they give you something back, we can actually store this value. Just like we declare a variable here and we set it to an array, if a function returns a value, as is stated in the documentation, that it returns that element, rather than just calling favoritefruits.pop, which you can if you want. But if you want that return value, you can also declare a variable and set it equal to your function call. That way, it will not only remove the last element from an array by calling pop, but it will also return the value to the variable that you've assigned it to. And as we saw, by doing that, it logged out raspberry to the screen. Now, I understand that concept of a function returning a value might still seem a little bit weird, but for now, when you're reading the documentation and you're just playing with these methods, just know that if it says it returns a value, you can actually, store that value by declaring a variable and setting it equal to the function call. But once we get to functions, I promise the idea of a function just doing something or a function doing something and returning a value will become more clear. But we just haven't gotten there yet. Like right now, we're just learning the fundamentals of JavaScript, but in the next video, when we actually start writing functions, this whole return value will start to make more sense. So before moving on, let's just do one more array method just to solidify this concept. So we'll go back to our documentation or back to the blog post, and we'll mess around with this push method. So array.push, it says it adds one or more elements to the end of an array, and it returns the new length of the array. Okay, so this is a method that we can call, and it will also give us a value back. So let's see how this works. So we're going to go here. We'll just delete all of this. Actually, no. We'll keep that first line. So we'll leave the same array that we had earlier, and now we're going to do returned value because we know it returns a value. We just want to see what that is and illustrate the concept. But what we're going to do is favorite fruits, but instead of calling pop, we're going to call push. And then in here, we're going to add another fruit. So push, and this time we provided a parameter, which is the string passion fruit. All right, so down here, we're going to do console.log favorite fruits, and then we'll do one more console.log for returned value. Okay, so that's our code. Let's go back to the documentation one more time. It says adds one or more elements to the end of an array, and then it returns the new length of the array. So because we added passion fruit here, favorite fruits down here should show us mango, blueberry, raspberry, and passion fruit. And then our return value, which is the new length of the array, should be 4. So we'll go back to terminal, we'll run this, and we see mango, blueberry, raspberry, and passion fruit because we push passion fruit onto favorite fruits. And then the return value is the new length of the array, which is now 4. So everything's good. All right, so the last topic we're going to discuss today is the concept known as iteration. And iteration is, I think, going to be the first time where you really feel like you're doing some magic with the programming that we've been writing. But iteration, is just the process of like repeating through a bunch of steps over and over. So like if I had a stack of papers that I needed to sign, I would iterate through the stack of papers, signing each piece of paper. And when it comes to programming, I want to build up to this concept. So let's start by declaring a string, and we'll do add them like that. And then we're just going to do console.log, and we're actually going to use a string method called char@, or character at, and we just provide that a parameter, and which is an index. In this case, we're just going to provide it 0. So we'll save that, go back here, we'll run our code, and we see that A is logged out. So this should kind of remind you of an array, right? Whenever we were accessing specific elements within an array, we would provide an index, and it would give us the element at that index. Similarly here, we're providing char@, or character at, an index, and it gives us the character within the string at that index. So let's say we wanted to write out every single character in the string. Well, we'd have to do something like this. We'd have to copy console.log, update that to 1, do it again, update that to 2, do it again, update that to 3, and so on. And this might kind of remind you of, when we first introduced variables. We had this greeting like hello world. We imagined that we were using it multiple places within our application, but whenever we needed to update that value, we would have to update every single instance of it. Similarly here, we're copying and pasting the same code over and over when really only one thing is changing. And this is when we can really use iteration to our advantage. So we'll begin with a generic for loop. And what I'm going to do is actually go back to the blog posts. I'm going to copy that. I've obviously been saying console.log too many times, and I'm just going to paste that in here. So similar to an if statement, we start a for loop with this keyword for, and then we follow it with a set of open and close parentheses. And within the open and close parentheses are 3 different expressions that we have separated by semicolons. So we'll start with this first one, let I equals 0. This is what's known as the initialization step. This is basically where you just initialize what is referred to as a counter for your loop. So this I equals 0, it's just going to increment every time this loop runs, typically. After that, we have I is less than 5. This is the expression that is evaluated before each time this loop runs. So before the loop runs, it hits this condition right here, and it evaluates whether or not I is less than 5. And if it's true, it executes the statements within this curly brace. If it's false, it jumps outside of this, and it starts running from line 4 to line 5 to 6, and so on. And then finally, we have this final expression here, which is evaluated after each time the loop runs, and this is where we increment the counter variable that I was mentioning earlier. So this I++ here is just shorthand for basically saying take the existing value of I and just bump it up by 1. So let's walk through this for loop as if we were the computer. So we hit this code. We see let I equals 0. So now we have a variable I that is 0. Is I less than 5? That's true. I is less than 5. So it should print out I, which is 0. We've hit the end of our loop. We go up here. We increment I by 1. So now I is 1. Now we go back to our condition. Is 1 less than 5? It is. So we run this. We print out the value 1. Now that we're done, we go back up here. We increment I by 1. Now it's 2. Is 2 less than 5? Still true. So we print out 2. Go back up here to our final expression. Increment I by 1. I is now 3. Is 3 less than 5? Still true. So we print out 3. Increment I by 1 more. Now I is 4. Is 4 less than 5? Still true. Print out I, which is 4. Go back up here to our final expression. Increment I to 5. Now we have 5 less than 5, which is false. Now that it's false, we break outside of our loop and we continue on with our execution. There's nothing on line 4, but there is console.log done outside the for loop. So what we should see printed to the screen when we run this is 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then finally done outside the for loop. So we'll go back here, run our code, and we see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, done outside the for loop. Hopefully that's at least a little bit cool, right? We're now finally starting to see some of the automation and programming. Everything we've been writing up to this point is us writing things out. Console.log this, console.log that. Now we've just automated console.log. We can see how we might be able to do something with this because we've written a loop that just says, hey, do this thing however many times we've defined in our loop. So let's go back to our other example. You remember this thing when we were doing console.log and we were manually incrementing that index? Now we can see how we might be able to automate this. We might be able to remove the copying and pasting and the need to, if we ever need to change this, we have to go in and manually update the indexes. Or if the method changed, if we no longer want to do character at, we would have to find and replace every single method name and hope we didn't make any typos. Otherwise, we break things. Let's instead use loops to do this. So we'll jump back to Visual Studio Code. We'll go ahead and delete all of this, and we'll declare my name. We'll set it to that. And now we're going to use a loop to iterate through this string and print every character in the string. So we'll start with for. We do our open and close parentheses. We'll do let I equals 0. And then earlier we had I is less than 5. We just wanted some predefined number of iterations. But now we're going to do I is less than name.length. Whoops, capital I here. That's going to be our condition. Every iteration of this loop, we're going to compare I as it's incremented to the length of our string. And as long as it's less than that length, we should be good to continue printing the next character in the string. And then finally here, we're going to do I++ to just increment I on every iteration of this loop. Then we do our open and close braces, which is what some people refer to as a block. Basically just means like this is the code that belongs to the for loop. And in here, we can now write that bit of code that we want to automate. So we'll do console.log, name.character@, and now that parameter, that index that we have to provide it, rather than providing it a manual number, a hard-coded number like we did before, we can just put I. Because we know that on every iteration of this loop, I is going to be bumped up one integer. And then down here, just for illustration purposes, we'll do done. I cannot type. So now we should see capital A printed, D, A, M, and then done. So we'll go back to this, or go back to our terminal, clear this, run that. We see A, D, A, M, and done. So we'll just walk through a few iterations of this. So we have let I is equal to 0. So we initialize with 0. Is 0 less than name.length? We know name.length is 4. So is 0 less than 4? True. So we do console.log name.character@, I is 0. So it's like we just substitute the number 0 in there. So we print out A. Then we go up here, we increment I to 1. Is 1 less than name.length? Yes, because name.length is 4. So we print out index 1, which is D. Then we go back up here, increment I to 2. Is 2 less than 4? True. So we print out index 2, which is lowercase a. Go back up here to I++. I is now 3. Is 3 less than 4? Still true. We print out index 3, which is M. Then we go back to I++. I is now 4. Is 4 less than 4? No. They're equal. So it's false. And then it comes down here and prints out done. And as we saw, A, D, A, M, and then finally done. Iteration isn't just for strings either. Just because we've used it for strings in these examples, we can also use it for arrays as well. So let's imagine we had a variable sales set to an array of numbers. So we'll do a bunch of numbers like this. And then we can do a for loop to iterate through that array and print out every element within the array. So again, we'll do for let I equals 0. I is less than sales.length, and then I++. And then in here, we'll just do console.log sales, and we use our bracket notation and specify the index within sales. So we just want to log out every element within sales. So we'll save that, back to our terminal, run that, and we see 5, 7, 3.5, and 8. We can build on this even more. We can make it, slightly more practical. So rather than just printing every element within the array of sales, let's keep a running total. So just below this, we'll do let total equals 0. And then now instead of just printing every element within sales, what we're going to do is total equals total plus specific element within sales that we're iterating through. So now on every iteration of I, so we'll just start from the beginning. I equals 0. Is I less than sales.length, which is 4? That's true. So now total is equal to total, which is 0, plus 5. So that's what happens on that first iteration. Total is 0 equals 0 plus the first element within sales, which is 5. Then we come up here, I++. I is now 1. Is 1 less than 4? True. Now total is equal to 5 plus 7, which is 12. So we repeat that over and over again, and we'll come back here, run our code, and we forgot to console.log total. So we'll save that. Run it one more time, and we see that it accurately summed up all of the sales within the array on each iteration, printing out the final total at the end, 23.5. All right, so we'll wrap this up by working through one more example, which I've included at the end of the blog post. So we're just going to copy and paste this here. I'll delete that. And as you can see, we have an array of strings. So we have 3 elements here: run, hide, and get away. And then we have our for loop. So, So we have our for loop, which, again, we initialize with an I as 0. We specify our condition, which is I is less than exclamations.length, which is 3. And then our final expression is just incrementing I by 1. So we'll start at the beginning. I is 0. Is 0 less than 3? That's true. So we go down here to our code. Exclamations at index 0, which is run, is equal to itself dot to uppercase. So we're taking the value here, exclamations at 0, which is run, dot to uppercase, and just assigning it to the exact same element in the array. So we uppercase that, go up to our final expression. I is now 1. Is 1 less than 3? That's true. So we take the exclamation at index 1, which is hide, uppercase it, and assign it back to itself, back to the same element within the array. Jump back up to I. We increment I. I is now 2. Is 2 less than 3? It is. So we take exclamation at index 2, which is get away. We uppercase it, assign it back to the same element within the array. Come back up here to I++. I is now 3. Is 3 less than 3? No, they're equal to each other. That's false. Now we can come down here and log our new exclamations array. So we'll save that, come here, run it, and we see that sure enough, we get the exact same array that we started with, only every element within the array is dot to uppercased or capitalized. As usual, at the end of my blog post, there are a few exercises for you to work on. So you can copy and paste these over here. And then beside each console.log, you can just add a comment and write out what you think is going to be printed to the screen. If you work through that and you have any questions, you can actually just come up here and you'll see this need some help. Click here to join a Discord server created exclusively for the series. So if you run into any issues with that, you have any questions, just click there, join the Discord server. I'm in it. You can ask me questions. But for now, I'm just going to paste the exercises in there, and then we'll finish by doing all of this conclusion GitHub stuff. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to create a new repository, web dev properties and methods, I think is what we called it. Create repository, and I'm going to just copy this command right here. What I'm going to do is git init to create the git repository to initialize it. Then I'm going to add everything to it. I'm going to do a git commit -m, which is the commit message. I'll show where this appears in a minute. So we'll just do add properties and methods exercises. And then we use this thing, get remote add origin. This links your local directory to the directory on GitHub. And now that you've done that, you can do git push origin master. So give me a second. It works through all that. And then you can come back here and refresh. And there you see the file that we just created with all of the exercises. And then here, if you just click on this one commit thing, you'll see that commit message that you just added. All right, that's all I have for today. If you found this information valuable, if you like the series, I'd really appreciate you clicking the subscribe button below, leaving a like. If anything was confusing, feel free to leave a comment below. Let me know you have a question, or more importantly, find that Discord link in the description below or within the blog post and join the Discord. This is now my full-time job, so if anything's confusing and you have questions, a great way to get in touch with me is through that Discord channel. So go ahead and click it, join the channel. Let me know any questions you guys have. Thanks for watching.